Hi everyone, and welcome to SWPL My Story. And today we are joined by Hannah Bardell MP. How are you, Hannah?
I'm good. I'm good. Thanks for having me on.
No, I really appreciate you coming on. It's great to get someone within government to come along and talk about what we're doing, how the country's trying to drive forward. But obviously, sport and football in particular has been a huge passion of yours and a real motivation for a lot of the work that you do. So, you just tell us a little bit of that kind of background to yourself and how it's helped push you on to where you are today.
Of course. So I grew up playing football. Like I grew up in Livingston and Craigshill, and had a field at the back of the house, my school field, and it was jumpers down for goalposts kind of stuff, and we played freely for hours and hours. And then at school, it was the beginning. So I was born in 1983, so I'm 40. So you can imagine in the kind of mid 80s, really women's football wasn't that much of a thing. In fact, would be more of a joke really back in those days, which was tough. But there was even then there was people like remember one of my teachers, Mrs. Shaw, Eleanor Shaw, who I'm still friendly with. She was so passionate about girls playing sport, particularly, and being included. And I remember her, taking the girls' team when we were at primary school. I played with the boys, obviously, for years and years, but she encouraged the girls' team as well. And then when I went into high school at Broxburn Academy, we had a girls' team then, and actually Stephen Craig, the footballer, was my football coach when I was in sort of senior in fifth and sixth year in high school, and that always left a big impression on me because years later when Stephen went on to play professionally, he still lives in the area, and we would bump into each other, and I would be like, he was my football coach. And then when I went to university, I went to Stirling, and one of the reasons I picked Stirling was because it had such a strong focus on football and sport, and I knew they had a really good women's football team, and that for me was sort of life affirming. I mean, the friends that I made during my time at Stirling and the level at which we got to play. I mean, we played in the British universities. We played against women from all over the UK, and we did not bad. We held our own. I mean, I have to say, Leanne Ross was in our team, so you can
That
imagine
helps.
she pretty much carried us. And that was an incredible thing as well. I mean, Gemma Fay at the time played for Edinburgh. She was their keeper, so I got to play. I'm able to say that I played alongside Leanne Ross and against Gemma Fay. In fact, I've been halved by Gemma Fay. So, on reflection, now looking back, like what an amazing experience. I mean, I obviously my life and career took a different path, but football's always been something for me. And Livingston then obviously became a club, moved out, Meadowbank Thistle as it was, moved out to Livingston. I remember when the club started, it was always very much a family-based club. And then when I was at university, I worked at Livingston FC in my spare time. So I did the players' lunches, I worked behind the bar, I worked behind reception, and I even served the MP at the time, Robin Cook. So for me, football's just been woven into my life. And it's always been something, a bond, I think, between friends, but in family as well. My brother and I played for hours together out in the football field, kicking the ball around. It was always something that, whilst we might have been quite different, we shared a love of football. And yeah, so to see the game now the women's game go to where it's gone, and all the developments that have happened, it makes me excited for the little girl that I was then playing, and there was no structure and there wasn't really that many opportunities to see what like my nieces. I've got a nearly 4-year-old niece and a 9-year-old niece, and whether they choose to play football or not, certainly my youngest niece is very talented at kicking a ball. There will be opportunities for them if they want them, and they could have a career and a whole life being involved in football, and I think that's a huge step forward.
So, as you've alluded to, sports always been a real passion of yours. That's partly the reason why you chose to study at Stirling. Obviously, you said your career went in a different path, and then you became a member of Parliament. Is the sport aspect and that interest in your life been a major driver in a lot of the campaigns that you're involved in and the work that you're trying to do from a parliamentary level?
Definitely. I mean, I haven't played for a wee while because I tore my knee up. Common injury, but not playing football, ironically. So I went back and then hurt myself again. So I'm just easing myself back in now. But wherever I've gone in my career, I've always sought out a team or people to play with. And that's, for me, it's always been an escape at times from whatever's going on in life, but also it's something, the mentality of playing sport, of playing in a team, and that team mentality has always been something that I have taken through my work life as well. And I think it's really applicable in politics. And I know people say you shouldn't mix politics and sport, but actually I think there's a lot as politicians that we can learn from people in sport, and particularly, football, in terms of that, how people work together for an end goal. And it's a really fundamental point. It sounds a bit a kind of twee, I suppose, but there is just a universal truth in the passion that comes with football and sport, and the passion that I feel for politics and social justice. And I think certainly when I came to Parliament, there was that piece of me that wanted to promote women's sport and be involved in it in as much as I could, not just from a recreational perspective, but from a sort of professional work perspective. So, doing everything I could to amplify the voices of, whether it's the women's national team, whether it's local teams, and being involved. And, I don't get along to as many games, or haven't in recent times. I think we all changed our habits during COVID, obviously, and some of those habits we haven't picked back up. But even seeing the way that the game in England has developed as well. I went out to France for the Women's World Cup to see Scotland play, and that was an incredible experience. It was just something that I will never ever forget. And then, seeing even the Lionesses do so well in recent competitions, incredible. And there will always be that rivalry between Scotland and England in many respects, particularly in terms of football and sport. But I was, full scale behind the Lionesses, and seeing the way that the game in England has been developed. And it has frankly been developed a lot more significantly, and it's to a greater extent and level in England than in Scotland. But we have a lot of our Scottish players playing in the English leagues and playing internationally. So, it's good for us that England are developing both at a club and a national level, because our players that go and play in those clubs and get exposure and get experience, our national team then benefits. What we want to now see, I think, is Scotland raising its game in that regard, and looking at the opportunities. And we are, there's a lot being done, whether it's through the Scottish Women's Premier League, but through the SFA. Still think there's more that can be done, and all the people associated with grassroots football. I started playing for a team in Glasgow a wee while ago called the Camp Hellcats. They started really during, or as things eased up in lockdown. They were having to play. These were women, particularly LGBT women and non-binary people, playing and looking for a safe space to play sport. And it started as a kind of five-a-side thing, and it's recreationally, and it's turned into a whole league now. And they've got A and B teams, some of these teams, and the Camp Hellcats were just, for me, amazing to be part of. I'm not able to play so much now because it's in Glasgow, but I've even seen in West Lothian, my local team Broxburn have started a women's recreational game, and apparently had loads and loads of people along to it. Last night was their first night, and I wasn't able to be there because I was here in London voting, understandably. But just seeing that pop up, and women come from all different walks of life. And we've got a team at Westminster that I was part of myself, Tracy Crouch, the Conservative MP, and Alison McGovern, the Labour MP. We were sort of founding members, along with Joe Tanner, who's our sort of club captain and was our sponsor initially. And that was a real cross-party endeavour. And now they play on a Monday, every Monday evening. They train on a Wednesday morning. And it's something, it's not just women in politics who work with politicians, it's people in all different walks of life, journalists coming together, putting their differences and their different views to one side and just having a game of football. And that's, at the end of the day, that's what it's about. And I think if we could have more of that in politics, of people just putting their differences to one side, then we would probably get on a lot better in the world.
Like, going back to there where you're talking about the growth, obviously you're in London a lot, and you'll see the growth of the girls and the women's game. The WSL is absolutely flying. It's a flagship league in women's football. The English national team doing so well. Scotland, when I was also there in Paris for the World Cup, but we always see a bump in participation levels after a big tournament. But I think just our proximity to England and how all the games are getting shown on Sky. I've spoken with particularly former players when we discuss these things and how important that is for the girls coming through to see what they can achieve. But the massive work that's going on at the SWPL and the SWF with Fiona and Viv driving that from a grassroots level right to the top level. You're seeing it even just before we've come on today. The draw for the League Cup semi-final is taking place live on Sky Sports. That wouldn't have happened even maybe a year ago. So it is showing that the growth is there, and there's some fantastic work going on with the people that are working behind the scenes.
Absolutely. And like, you just need to look at, to the US. I mean, I remember going and playing in North America when I was at university. We went on tour to Canada. And I mean, we were in second year at university and we were playing against the girls' team. I think we're sort of 15, 16, and they were running rings around us, not least because we were probably, not as fit as we could have been, but just because they were so serious about it, and seeing the value, millions, if not billions of dollars being pumped in, but also being coming out from sponsorship and from the interest. Megan Rapinoe, all of those amazing US players who have raised the game up and have helped us get a much bigger audience for women's sport and specifically women's football. There are audiences out there, and I know a lot of men who really enjoy watching women's football because, it is different. Of course it's different. And, and I've lost count of the number of guys that have said to me, I really enjoy it. It's much more straightforward. There's much less drama. There's much less violence and aggression. And I think for, people wanting their kids to be engaged in sport and to go and watch sport, they probably will feel a bit safer in some respects taking their kids to a women's game than they would certain men's games. Not all of them. And I like to think clubs like Livingston do an amazing job, and there are so many grassroots clubs out there and lower league clubs that are making a very welcome space. But we can't get away from some of the challenges that we've got in Scottish football with, around some teams. But at the end of the day, what's been amazing to see, I mean, you've got to pay tribute, to the founders of Glasgow City, all the work that was done, and they were there at the very beginning. I mean, at one point, was there not like, I think 16 or 17 of the squad in Scotland had come through Glasgow City, and a lot of players that had gone on to play internationally, also in England as well. They were there. Laura was there, at the very, very beginning. And it's interesting now seeing the big clubs, Rangers and Celtic, good on them, all of the major Premier League clubs getting women's teams, putting investment into women's football and sort of following suit of Glasgow City with the example that they set. And it's just going to be really interesting to see how that develops in terms of the association with men's clubs and men's teams, which I think is really good, but also really important that we develop our own culture, and that it's sustainable so people can make a career out of it, but perhaps it doesn't go to the extremes that men's football's gone to in some respects, less so in Scotland, although it does happen, but the phenomenal amounts of money being paid, and it just being totally off the scale and ridiculous. It's I think there's a big discussion to be had about that in terms of how that goes. Equally, we're nowhere near that in terms of the women's game. We still, we need more sponsorship. We need the game to be built up. We need companies in society to invest in it as well and understand that it's a massive opportunity. Like seeing it on, young girls and boys seeing women's football on the television being broadcast is a massive landmark moment. It's just not something that I saw when I was a little girl. I did not see an opportunity or that reflected back, and now young people will see that. They will see the Lionesses, they will see the Scotland team, they will watch, Women's World Cups being broadcast and to huge audiences that we could never have imagined. So, we're absolutely going in the right direction. But I think there are still some challenges there in terms of access, in terms of sponsorship, and in terms of, just look at Mary Earps and the whole nonsense over the goalkeeper's shirt. That was just like, it was the worst PR I think I've ever seen in my life. Just thought it's embarrassing, and she was so dignified through it and so decent about it. But you just think, for goodness sake, of course people are going to want to buy the shirt. Print, just make it, and coming up with all these ridiculous excuses. It was just daft. It was just daft, but that does show that there is still a long way to go in some respects.
So we've just, as we've touched on there, so that's more from like the league's perspective, bringing in sponsorship. But having you on, it would be daft of me not to ask from a parliamentary point of view, and what are the aims at the moment for the coming years to continue this drive and expansion in girls and women's sport, and obviously in particular football.
Yeah, so, I mean, obviously we've, in terms of Scotland, the landscape is a bit more different to England and perhaps, UK wide. But I mean, we've lost Aileen Campbell from the Scottish Parliament, which was a big loss to us. But she's obviously gone over to women's football, which is a big gain for them. And seeing Fiona McIntyre, promoted into that role, obviously now taking on an international role as well. We've got our women in Scotland who are representing at a policy level, really taking a lead and really showing leadership. And I think the Scottish government has put more resources and much more focus into women's sport, women's health, and specifically women's football. But I think there is still challenges there, though, in terms of scope and scale and the grassroots stuff. I mean, a lot of it's happened organically, but I think we always want to see more support. What's interesting from a UK perspective is the work that Tracy Crouch has done on on football fans and clubs and the regulation of the game. And I think that that's been a really, really important and inclusive piece of work, and that will have an impact UK wide. There's no doubt. And she did a review into it. It was very much fan led, or certainly fans were heavily engaged with, and as a result, obviously, piece of legislation in the King's Speech, and a better regulation around this. I mean, it is interesting when you think about was it European Super League stuff that happened a while back, and just the outrage around that. And I mean, that was fans that led that. It was football fans that stood up and said, absolutely not. This totally takes away the spirit of competition, that you just have certain teams essentially locked in, kind of what's happened with the live golf stuff.
Yeah.
And we need to be really careful of that and really mindful of that certain money from certain places in certain countries, we have to, because football, there's a lot of sport washing going on. Having the World Cup in Qatar, there's the potential of it going to Saudi Arabia. That's massively problematic, in my view, not least about how they treat women in the country. And others will argue, however, it shone a light. It meant that they were criticised and they were critiqued. So there's always a balance to be struck there. But look at some of the money. I mean, I know we're going a bit off topic, but some of the money coming into, Abramovich obviously buying Chelsea and things like that, that all, that presents challenges to the football industry in general. But from a parliamentary perspective, because we've had more women than ever in Parliament in the last, since, when I was elected in 2015, there were more men in that one sitting than would ever had women elected to the UK Parliament. So that was a pretty grim statistic. But in 2017, we surpassed that milestone. So we've got more women than ever engaged in politics. And so, and a lot of us in certainly the UK Parliament, and I know in the Scottish Parliament as well, who are very engaged in sport and play it and play together, but are also there talking about it. And I think that's a very, quite a big thing. I mean, one of the first things that I ever did when I was elected in 2015, it wasn't about football, it was about rugby, but the Rugby World Cup was about to happen, and they were banning bagpipes at the World Cup. And so Tracy Crouch was a sports minister at the time, and I took it up with her, and I took it up with the head of World Rugby, and we got the ban lifted, and that was like, I had a really nice chat with her. I was new in the door. I didn't know her, didn't know anybody really. And she was like, no, like that doesn't make any sense, because they were being classed as a dangerous weapon, so it was, and I had been at the previous Rugby World Cup in Australia, in New Zealand, and seen people like having challenges getting their bagpipes down, so I was like, this is silly. But so I think that's the thing, is that quite often, particularly around football, there's a real cross-party nature to, and obviously, we did this thing during Brexit, feels like forever ago now, where we were due to play our first match as the women's parliamentary team. We all had our green strips on with a portcullis on, and the game had to be postponed because of a vote on Brexit, because it was such a, and it was really such a toxic and adversarial time in politics. Do you know, it was really the atmosphere in Parliament was horrible. But there we were, a group of women, Labour, Conservative, SNP, in our football strips, ready to play a game together. It got cancelled, so we wore our strips through the lobby, and Mr. Speaker at the time let us take a picture together in the chamber, with our arms around each other, just showing that actually in politics sometimes there is agreement. And then we had I had a little kick about it. I did some keepy uppies, and that ended up getting me in the press. It was just a moment in time. It was just a bit of fun. Ended up on the front page of the Sun the next day. And there was, there was a lot of people that lost their mind over it because they thought it was really disrespectful. It was never ever meant in a disrespectful way. And everybody else wrote to the Speaker and apologised. And I was like, no, I'm not going to write and apologise because I don't think I've got anything to apologise for. What we've done actually as a team is shown politics and the Chamber of the House of Commons in a different light. Now, some won't like that because they like the tradition and all the rest of it. But we had a moment of fun in amongst a really difficult and toxic time. And that was positive. And the vast majority of people, and it was really funny. I mean, it ended up in the news, like in America and stuff. And some of the clips are they're very funny. But, it was something really special, actually. And for me, that is what the game is about. It is about bringing people together. And at a time when the world is so divided on so many issues, we need more sport. We need more people involved in sport. And obviously I'm going to say football, it's because it's one of my favourite sports, but just that thing, whether it's around mental health, and I think particularly for men and young men, who are some of the most badly affected by suicide and mental health issues, and having mixed games as well. Like, we've had quite a lot of games against like journalists in the lobby and different organisations who've sought us out, men's teams, to say, oh, would you really like to play a friendly, and I think that's really lovely as well. But yes, I think football is something that can help and support people on a whole range of scales and bring levels and bring folk together, and that's something that we need to nurture and encourage.
That's great, Hannah. I really, really appreciate the time you took to talk to us today.
My pleasure. Lovely to be with you.
And thanks everyone for watching SWPL My Story.